Hey, good day, YouTube. So this is going to be a continuation of the VR for Corsair Trainer and his EMP tabletop scenario that he's been presenting. He's now on day 5. Go check that out in the description box below, or at the cards, or at the links at the end, depending on how you want to get there. We're going to provide you links to get there. But he's continuing to present the scenario. It's good stuff. He's breaking off into some different thought processes and exposing other thought processes for their insanity that they are. But it's good stuff. But continuing on with our scenario and how we would deal with it are some potential issues that we are thinking through or could be faced with here in this area. So we're at about day 5 in his scenarios presenting, and kind of going through some of the thought process in my chat that we brought up earlier. Just to continue with that line of thought, is one of the things we might run into a problem here with is overextending resources to help other people, whether it's neighbors or others. I do see that people in general would go out of their way to look to see who they could help. In particular, we talked about helping others like the elderly or people that are otherwise infirm, I guess you could say, and especially in dealing with any environmental causes like heat or cold. People going out of their way to help them with either, if you had a generator that worked, or bringing them wood for fire, or bringing them water, and extending yourself to help people like that would be a challenge that people could run into that would end up stretching them too far. People would overextend themselves to do those things. Especially now at day 5, people start to figure out who those people are. You're probably going to have to start dealing with people that are dying in their homes from, especially the elderly and others that are either exposed to the elements or have otherwise incurable diseases they've not got proper medicine for, or any other number of issues, especially with a power out. If they will live off of a oxygen system, if they have oxygen or something like that. There's a high degree of elderly here in this area, retired folks and stuff, that rely on those things that could be passing away at the quickness at this point, going day 5 in, and people would be looking to help them as best they can, and that could end up overextending themselves resource-wise and time-wise, that they could commit to that, and it would be very difficult to support them. If there were any fuel resources or anything that were available or were useful, like generators, for some reason maybe potentially worked, or vehicles, especially off-road vehicles. I was thinking about this. I'm not sure about the complexity of like your quad, your side-by-sides, motorcycles, things like that. How quickly you could get those working again. People potentially could have the ability to use those, but that would extend their fuel resources, and people could be looking to use those. But even if they only use animal-drawn sources to help other people, could just become debilitating, trying to continue to help other people like that. But I see that it could be a challenge, but also be a positive, and could bring the community more together. In that respect, at this point in day 5, you would really know who was in the area, who was having challenges. Hopefully we would have extended our knowledge base out several miles. We haven't talked about this since like basically day 2. So between 3, 4, and 5, as long as there's no other outside influence presenting themselves, really it's just going to be getting into that daily grind of survival, catching water, finding out your water resources, finding out what we need. We're still going to have enough water stored up at this point that we would still be in pretty good shape, depending on how hot it is, depending on how many. We would definitely be looking at processing animals and sharing those animals for others to participate, to consume, because we wouldn't want them just dying on the hoof. So we would want to get them out the door, mostly because of limited water. They can put them on free graze and free range. A lot of respects is no problem, but the water and catching it and bringing it in and getting the water in would be a challenge. And so that's something to more so to think through, especially if vehicles aren't available. There are other horse-drawn and other methods that can be considered that we would have to be thinking about. But getting water and things out to the neighborhood, and does everybody have access, would be a concern. And sharing food, much like Steve's talking about, having that community event would be useful if everybody could kind of like get a rotation. There's probably not a house within eyesight that doesn't have a propane grill. Like, everybody would, be able to share in that experience, I think. There's lots of propane resources. I can look around and see things like fifth wheels, obviously barbecues, and other things that could be useful for some sort of energy source. If it was winter, heat source, and other things that could be spread throughout. There's a large resiliency, I think, built into the area that people just naturally live that way already. So day 5, we wouldn't be pushed too far to the brink community-wide, but there would be the vulnerable people in particular could be a challenge at this point. And helping them would be extending a lot of people. Steve brought up some other issues. In particular, he talked about an integrity check. Talking about using tools, needing tools that are natural, that don't require power, don't require batteries. And we have hand tools in spades, I think. Hand saws, hacksaws, shovels, pickaxes, all the necessary excavation equipment to do by hand, post hole digger, all those things that could potentially be useful or would be necessary to continue functioning around here, but also to continue to improve our position. Those would be on standby to use at any given point for any given thing. But yes, hand tools are not a problem around here. But also, he got to talking about into my wheelhouse a little bit, and talking about security would start to become a concern for him. And he kind of talked about his perimeter security issues and how he would create standoff and delay tactics, which is what defense does. Like he said, any static defense can eventually be moved through. Defense will be penetrated eventually, some way, somehow, no matter what you got. If you got a concrete block house, somebody's eventually going to get through that perimeter. Where there's a will, there's a way. There are tools out there. There are many resources people could combine together to breach your defenses, if you will, for lack of a better word. And Steve kind of talked about that in his, and on my end, he talks about he is limited because obviously he's in a much smaller land. Whoa, there's a breeze. He is in a smaller landlocked area. Anybody that's watched the channel know we got a land plot, several acres. We have some defensive advantages with being able to view a long way, but that's also a disadvantage because you're easily observed from a long way away. So people could stand off, in the distance, out and about, and be watching on a daily basis what we're doing just as easily as we can be watching them on a daily basis. So there's advantages and disadvantages there. Having optics, scope, and binoculars to observe with is going to be key. So I can sit here in the shade and observe on any given day is useful. But also, there's certain parts of the property that, or when they're conjoined with neighbors, that I want to be able to share them interlocking defense. And that's going to be part of bringing the neighbors in over the last couple of days to address any concerns I know about theirs. Now, I know, fortunately, in this neighborhood, it's almost all horse property. So almost every property around has a fenced area. A fence is an excellent delay obstacle for human traffic. We don't have to worry about vehicles at this point because vehicles are inoperable in this scenario, so that's good. Because there could be concerns about vehicle obstacles, but we're going to not worry about that right now, but human obstacles to delay and channelize, as he discusses, human traffic is very key. And fortunately, to corral animals, I also have the tools and equipment necessary to corral and channel humans. Fortunately, at least delay them in their movements. You know, we have areas laid out with fencing and everything throughout the area that we can use for this, and we have excuse me, talked through a lot of this already in some of our defensive measures with our clan here. And I think, and my kids are a little bit older than Steve, so they're able to contribute a little bit more to security than his youngins, but they are still limited in their knowledge and understanding. So we just go through a thought exercise of how many hundreds of yards it is from my observation post to my furthest obstacle, furthest out perimeter, fence perimeter, right? I can measure that out and just do a simple math calculation. How long would it take for a fast human to run across that open terrain? Because pretty much it's all open terrain here. So we get about a 20-second advantage of observation, if you want to look at it that way, of being able to observe and react to somebody before they are on top of us. If they are sprinting at the cyclic rate, irrespective of their health or other condition, takes somebody about 20 seconds to get from our furthest obstacle into our inner perimeter. So that's just a calculation, maybe something to think about if you're looking at your own inner defense and perimeter defense. At least when you talk about humans, when you talk about people moving over those obstacles and coming at you for whatever reason. And then there are different directions and different angles that they can take, of course, and knowing how far and where your dead zones are, where you can't see on your property. We have some of those. We have areas where I can stand in one, I can have a huge area of observation, but I do have dead zones that I need to cover, and I can use some of that channelizing equipment, whether it's other fencing or other tools. Bob wire set up as a tanglefoot is an example, to get people out of those areas quickly or to delay them in that area long enough to react to them where I can't observe, and it trips them up otherwise or puts them into an area that I can't observe quickly. If I can't put an observation post in a separate location to be able to see down into areas that are unobservable, for example. So that's some things that we've already put some thought into here, and thinking about my surrounding neighbors who I'm going to have share mutual defense with because we share a fence line, and we want to help look out for each other. I have to think about those things as well. But having materials, fencing, T-post, 2x4s, post, we've got tons of that because we have it ready to go for animals and corralling and tearing down corrals and building corrals and things for animals, and I can readily deploy that if I wanted to figure out a way to channelize humans that maybe have nefarious intentions and set it up so that they would come into my area of observation and area of engagement from an observation post, listening post. So having a large plot of territory, like having acreage, that's an advantage, I guess you could say, is we have that larger standoff than like what Steve has, but he has a good observation post from where he's at, which he talks about from his viewing point from his house, which is a consideration whenever you buy any property, or should be. Security is paramount, right? Oh goodness. But yeah, real good discussion by Steve here on day 5. We're really going to start getting in the nitty gritty about who has some preparations, especially water wise, and who does not. And we would really start to see things play out, negative outcomes for people on this day, these days coming forward. And depending on the weather around here, whether it's hot or cold, would really determine some of that outcomes, because we have a little more extreme weather. It's not a mild climate up here by any stretch. Not only is it the desert, it's the high desert. And even this morning we were talking, it was 50 in the 50 degree area. If if you're not properly clothed at night and properly prepared, if you're out exposed to the elements at night, you could succumb to hypothermia. And this is the middle of June, end of June, and the heat in the daytime without water, limited water, would become a real negative. We'd be changing our daily routine. Well, not really our daily routine, because we already kind of live by the siesta lifestyle. It's either done in the morning or it's done in the evening. It's not really done in the middle of the day, even though it's not, it's not Sonoran Desert, Mojave Desert hot up here, but that's just the cycle, because the animals lay down in the cool of the day too. You're not going to want to disturb them. You're not going to want to mess with them, and you want to have them fed and watered before that time comes around. So our routine wouldn't really change that much in that respect. And considering it's this time of year, that's the scenario we're dealing with. This, it's July time frame now, and we're going to start continuing that cycle. Maybe doing a little bit more in the late evenings, especially since it's going to take longer to do things without power, without mobile tractors and stuff like that. Stuff we rely on now that maybe not be operable in this scenario. We just have to rely on our muscles. It may take a little longer to get accomplished some of the things, so that would be a consideration. And that would happen probably in the late evening, afternoon time frame, when it's in the cool of the evening before dark, and then lights out is lights out. And that would probably be at this point we'd be getting into that routine. The first couple of days might be a little harder to get used to, especially the sleep pattern, but by this time our sleep pattern is probably pretty set. And right now it's siesta time. It's in that time of the day, 2, 3 in the afternoon, where siesta is here. Relax, cool, the shade provided by the tree, which hopefully we're able to still water and at least keep alive long enough to provide shade. And continue to ride it out while we provide security. Although it's really not going to be too concerning, because we do have early warning devices. We got dogs. One of the best warning devices we got is a guinea. If you may know what guinea hens are, they are extremely loud, and they cackle and sound, make the awfulest racket for anything that they don't like coming in their area, which includes me, but also any other human. So if they're close to the fence line or down and around, geese do the same thing. They'll start making a lot of noise if anything walks around the perimeter. So we've already got early warning devices in certain areas that we can rely on, especially at night in particular, when we can't see things that they're seeing. Dogs in particular, they see and smell and hear a lot better. And so do the neighbor dogs, which are always our other early warning devices. If the coyotes aren't howling around and the dogs are going crazy, there's something else amiss. Who knows what it is, but there's something else out there. They don't just bark at the moon. I had a good lesson at that a couple weeks ago, a little while back. We were standing out here right before dark, and as dusk is setting, it's like right to where you're getting a hard time seeing, having a hard time seeing more than 100 yards, right? Getting really dark, and the dog is next to me, and I'm looking out, and all of a sudden she just starts going crazy. And I'm like, what are you barking at? There's nothing. And just as about the time I say nothing, out of the corner of my eye, I can see this low flying object just fly just above head level, fly right by us, right over us. And it's a hawk, and she barks at it, chases it to the front of the property. And yeah, there you go. There's a prime example of we don't see it until it's too late. But she saw it right off and was like, you get out of here. Hawks, stay away from our chickens or whatever else. But that's just a prime example of early warning and trusting in your dog's instincts if they're of that type of guardian dog, Little rat dogs, chihuahuas and stuff, I can't help you out with. I don't know, they bark at anything. They are aggressive towards humans though, and other dogs for that matter. But just having those things are very key in this scenario that we're talking here, that Corsair's putting out there. And really we're just going to be in that siesta lifestyle, trying to get used to a new normal, waiting for any outside news. Is there anybody providing news? Not going out of our way to look for any trouble or look for anything to do, because we're going to have plenty to do. Like we talked about, cooperating with the neighbors on security in particular. There's going to be plenty to do, and difficult enough. So I don't need to be going out playing G.I. Joe or anything. We can just sit back and watch the world burn from here, which is, he talked about, you know, maybe seeing fires and things and gunshots in the distance, stuff like that. Noise travels a long way out here. There's always gunshots, especially when the hunting season starts out this way. You can definitely hear it when it starts. You know it. But fire season out here would be definitely be a concern, and definitely be worried about fire spreading in a environment like this. And you would look to make that part of the community defense is stopping and mitigating fire together as a common goal. If you see a fire in an area, people need to get together and get a fire line started. Shovels, pickaxes, bailing water. We'd be bailing water and finding out how we would pool water to do that. Whether you tap into people's stock tanks or whatever, that would be a huge concern to prevent a conflagration, because especially as this summer goes on, without a fire service, without the normal fire service that's provided, things could get sideways as people maybe are out there experimenting with ways to provide power and stuff, gas spillage, stuff like that. Fire would be a big concern up here as an issue, and that would go for any neighborhood, I would think, especially the closer the houses are. I mean, here we got the brush that would burn between houses to house, and a smaller neighborhood where it's just house upon house. You know, it's just going to spread just as quick potentially, and that's how do you prevent that? How do you put together a fire service? Maybe might be more important than security, but more important than community security. That is community security. Fire prevention is going to be huge. Not that fires were all that prevalent back in the day, but fire service is one of the first things established by communities because it's so hard to get under control. Once it gets out of control, it's very hard to get under. Look at San Francisco, circa 1912 or whatever. The Great Chicago Fire, all of it back in the day, those were huge concerns. Those would be new concerns that we've gotten used to not dealing with, but we're going to have to deal with that as a group now, and figure out how to deal with it as a group, and where roads serve as a partial fire break, but we get these winds going up here in particular, it spreads like wildfire, quite literally. So that's just some concerns here now that I'm thinking through on day 5. I told Corsair they didn't have much to contribute, and I got to talking on the chat, and it's like, well, I guess I can contribute a little bit, because it's just different considerations. It's different where everybody lives, and hopefully that listening to him and listening to other people that are participating gives everybody a different point of view and a different things to think about, other than throwing on the body armor and running down the street, as he says. So some more things to think about there, YouTube, that are security minded, but not security minded in the way that you're going to have to worry about gunning people down. Oh, and that reminds me of another thing. Man, this is good. This is a long one. This is a long video. He talked about non-lethal, less than lethal means. If I have a staff or a bat or any type of stick, I consider that non-lethal. I'm not going to be able to hit somebody one time with a staff or a bat and kill them immediately or be an automatic lethal. I mean, it's considered lethal in the terms of the legal definition of lethal force, but as far as actual lethality of me swinging a bat at somebody or using a staff, something like that, I consider that to be less than lethal. It's really hard to get to things that are less than lethal unless you have a chemical agent of some sort, your OC spray or something, which you may want to consider, especially if you have a lot of people like he's talking about. But when I have all these, he had an example he talked about on his chat, which you have to go check it out. If somebody has made their way over the obstacles that are provided in front of them, I consider them a lethal threat in this scenario. And even now, without WROL, without grid down, without SHTF, if they get through the barriers, they are deadly force is authorized in current times, legally, in the legal sense of the term. But in that case, in this scenario, here's the EMP and the SHTF. Yeah, it'd be just as much so in this scenario. So if somebody has gotten through over my barriers intentionally, I would consider lethality to be justified, although maybe not always warranted, and that would be when you'd go to, staff, bats, hand-to-hand, if you consider the threat not to be that great. Maybe somebody's mentally incapacitated by either inebriation, they've drank too much to ease their pain of the situation, or maybe they're on some type of medication they don't have. Those are things that might pop up that you evaluate. Okay, I don't want to, this is not a situation where I need to take this person out in this scenario, but I do want to incapacitate them and not make them mitigate the threat. So I bind them up in some way, which grappling, hand-to-hand can be used as part of that, or a staff, stick, bat can be used. I would consider those less than lethal. You can always muzzle thump somebody too, muzzle thump to the brain housing group or the chest can stop people too if they get too close. But I don't have a whole lot of less than lethal, and it's hard to really get anything unless you have that OC spray or something. But it was a good consideration he brought up about why you would want less than lethal, because when things do recover, you don't want to be accused of outright murder, of outright not inconsiderate murder in particular. So that's some more thoughts there, YouTube. This has been long in the tooth, but hopefully you get people thinking and continuing to follow along with Steve's discussion over there. Y'all have a good day. Live free.